What if you replace the moon with a giant disco ball? This might sound like a silly party idea that got way out of hand, but let's imagine for a moment that tomorrow morning, humanity wakes up and the familiar pale gray moon is gone. In its place, floating above Earth is a gigantic, shimmering disco ball, perfectly polished, glittering with millions of tiny mirrored tiles. At first, people would probably just stare in awe. Imagine stepping outside at night and instead of the calm glow of moonlight, you're suddenly blinded by streaks of light ricocheting in every direction. The sun's rays, instead of being absorbed by dusty lunar rock, would bounce off those mirrored surfaces and scatter wildly. Some cities might look like they're hosting a permanent festival. Instead of moonlight bathing the Earth evenly, you'd get unpredictable beams of sunlight shooting around the planet. You could be eating dinner in Paris, and suddenly your window lights up with a flash of midday brightness, while a farmer in Kenya is trying to sleep under what looks like a giant celestial strobe light. Astronomers would be furious. Telescopes rely on steady, predictable light conditions, and instead they'd be trying to observe distant galaxies while our artificial moon kept throwing dazzling flashes into their lenses. Stargazing apps would crash. Amateur astronomers would rage quit in despair. And let's not even talk about people trying to take romantic walks under the moonlight. That iconic soft silver glow? Gone. Instead, you'd be walking hand in hand under something closer to an out-of-control rave. But the disco ball moon wouldn't just affect our nightlife. The real moon has an important job. It stabilizes Earth's tilt and helps regulate tides. Replace it with a shiny mirrored ball of the same mass and size, and the physics of gravity stays more or less intact. So tides would still rise and fall, which is great news for surfers and terrible news for anyone hoping the disco ball might cancel their morning beach jog. However, the reflective surface would mess with temperature patterns on Earth. Some regions might experience sudden bursts of heating when the disco ball reflects sunlight down at odd angles. Others might end up darker than before, receiving less light. Crops that rely on predictable light cycles would start getting confused. Imagine trying to explain to your plants that yes, it's technically nighttime, but no, you're not hallucinating. That beam of sunlight across the field is very real. Now let's consider the disco ball itself. A real mirror-covered sphere in space would take a beating. Micrometeorites would smash into it constantly, chipping and cracking the tiles. Before long, it would no longer look like a pristine party decoration, but more like the aftermath of a warehouse rave, scratched, dented, and missing pieces. Over decades, the once shiny disco moon would grow patchy, reflecting light unevenly and creating bizarre patterns across the sky. Some areas of Earth might even get regular flash zones, where the light bounces in concentrated bursts. Imagine living in one of those unlucky regions, forced to sleep in blackout bunkers while your neighbors nickname your hometown the Eternal Dance Floor. Of course, humans would find a way to make money from it. Tourists would travel thousands of miles just to stand in a spot where the disco ball beams down directly, taking selfies in the middle of the night that look like they're on stage at a 1970s club. Whole industries might spring up selling disco insurance for people whose crops were fried by unexpected light beams. Governments would argue over who technically owns the disco ball and whether it should be considered a global heritage site or just the world's weirdest property dispute. Meanwhile, animals would be in trouble. Sea turtles, which normally rely on the moon's gentle glow to find their way to the ocean after hatching, would instead stumble toward random flashes, crawling inland instead of toward the waves. Migratory birds that use moonlight for navigation might find themselves flying in circles, chasing strobe effects like feathered ravers. Nocturnal animals in general would be deeply confused, waking up every time a disco ray blasted across their habitat. Humanity might be dancing, but the animal kingdom would not be amused. After a century or so, the disco ball moon would look less like a giant mirror and more like a glittery ruin, with chunks missing and sharp shards orbiting nearby. In fact, those shards could become a real problem. Imagine pieces of mirror falling into Earth's atmosphere, creating glowing streaks of reflected light as they burn up. Meteors